Thanks. First, I just want to check. We're also going to open this up to the floor to ask the group for their thoughts. Yes.
This is
good.
just a down payment for
Okay.
their suggestions.
Great. Because I think there's, as we saw in the last 2 days, there's a lot of accumulated wisdom here that I definitely, we definitely want to continue to hear from. So both Cindy and Jean have said at least half the things on my list, so that's good for all of you. My list will be shorter. And it's hard to absorb all the recommendations we got in the last 2 days. I'll just try to divide them into two things and take the perspective of one being part of PCORI and on the methodology committee along with Jean. I think there are two places where the kinds of things we've learned here can affect how PCORI acts. One is in the nature of the research that it supports, and the other is in the actual development of its support for further development of methods. In terms of the research it supports, I think there's some really, the PCORI is maybe, it is unique in being a research funding agency with its own legislatively mandated methodology committee. I mean, that really is kind of extraordinary. And I think because of that, it has in its DNA, and this conference is a manifestation of that, along with other conferences that we've had, the importance of pushing, using the most up-to-date methods and also pushing the envelope on methods in the research that it supports. So we've been talking, and we can't talk in detail today because this has not been worked out nor implemented, of changing the review process so that we can actually perhaps improve studies that we're interested in funding. So if that goes forward, there's huge opportunity for PCORI itself to take the research that is submitted, which is often, the focus is often disease-oriented, with very good goals, but maybe one statistician, maybe two, maybe none supporting it, and adding on to that, suggesting to the proposers that they do things that further many of the goals that have been mentioned here. And that, to me, I see as one of the really exciting potential roles that PCORI can play, is not just to be a passive recipient of what's out there, but to actively change the culture. And there's nothing that changes the culture quicker than either funding incentives or journal disincentives. And those are the things that really can produce the sort of changes that most of us sit around in our offices when we're on the other side of things, just wringing our hands of the rank either stupidity or limited vision of the funders or the editors or whatever. But there are opportunities here to change it. So how could we change it? Well, we heard some suggestions right from the get-go in RCTs, any RCTs that happen to be submitted to PCORI, and we'll see how many are supported, that we strongly encourage, if not mandate in particular situations, that they conduct parallel observational studies at a minimum, following, if they can, patients who do not want to be in the RCT but would agree to continue to be followed. In the recent debate over the support study, the fate of the infants who were not in that study was an absolutely critical piece. And of course, this has been done before, but to do it on a very systematic way, to have an ongoing opportunity for methods development in looking at the factors that make observational versus RCTs either equivalent or not would be a real opportunity. Similarly, we heard this over and over, we need to be gathering more information within the observational studies that are proposed so that the kinds of methods that Miguel and Jamie and others have developed to sort of mimic the RCT-like eligibility and analyses within those observational studies. So again, we can make the observational studies more similar, not in terms of eligibility, but in terms of the information that's gathered. So on both sides, pushing more richer observationally related information on the RCTs and more RCT relevant information in the observational studies could help us develop the field where as we do these things, we don't lose the opportunities to look at the commonalities between the methodologies and do the kinds of things also that OMOP is doing, which is to look at systematic biases in the observational sphere. I would certainly want PCORI on the methods development side. Other thing, I do think that the idea brought up repeatedly here of incorporating more patient information in almost everything we do, and of course this is very much part of the what PCORI wants to do is critical, but I think it's often fishing for exactly where those opportunities are. So patient engagement in the formulation of hypotheses is fine, but suggestions like patient portals into the EHR, just much more active solicitation of patient volunteered information, which Mary mentioned in the provision of outcome and prediction data, I think could be quite critical. Also, in terms of modeling, much more focus on harms and quality of life issues rather than, as has been said, mortality. Now, on the methods development side, I think, again, borrowing from suggestions that were made early on, more validation of different methods, exploring known relationships in high-quality databases, and here I'm echoing what Jamie Robbins said in the first session, would be extraordinarily useful. That's not often the kinds of things that are supported because it's not discovering new relationships, but that kind of validation goes a very, very long way in giving us confidence about the methods that we use. And I will note that that exact approach was used by a young informaticist at Stanford who looked using natural language processing into the EHR and looked for known drug adverse effect relationships like Avandia, like Vioxx, and found, I think it was 29 out of 30, 2 years before they were actually discovered through other means. And that's just recently been published. And that sort of thing, developing a broad database of methods and methodologies that have been validated against known interactions, I think, and also Nick Tatanetti did that. He didn't go back and found known ones, but he went back to the lab and he validated it against biology. So this sort of thing is very, very exciting. So looking forward to what is the kind of information that we need and what can be supported by PCORI through its methodologic grants, I think will be very, very exciting. Let me see. Oh, and I will say more globally. We have one thing we haven't talked here virtually at all, but I'll just put on the radar is the complexity of system change in the delivery of healthcare. And that's enormously, I think, more complicated than some of the things we've been talking here, a lot because of the context dependence of many of these interventions and the multifaceted nature of the interventions. And related to that, another thing I will underscore that was mentioned by several people is the importance of supporting the development, which is very little used now, of both adaptive designs and sequential designs. Sequential not in the continual monitoring, but sequential decision making, the smart, what are called the smart designs, where patients are re-randomized at every key decision point. I think it's only that kind of exploration that will begin to explore the real treatment pathways. And then just as a global comment, I think one of the most useful things in this conference, and actually that it was one of the design parameters of the conference, and we saw it played out, was the extraordinary value of having a critical mass of methodologists who really think deeply, who are at the foundations of developing the method, and similarly on the clinical research side. And you need both. What I mean is you need a critical mass of both. It's just one statistician isn't enough, just like one cardiologist isn't enough for discussing these tough problems. And to get this kind of dialogue reproduced within the procedures of, within the review procedures and the standard setting of PCORI, could be very, very, it would be a very important thing to maintain. It's not something we should just be doing at one-off conferences, because, you know, this will only last so long, and the GLOW and these recommendations. So we need to figure out how to, and we're already doing that, institutionalize the richness of the crosstalk that we saw here, to make sure that the best wisdom of the best thinkers on the methodologic side and on the clinical research and clinical side, as well as the patients, are brought to bear in everything that PCORI does. So I think I'll stop there.